Hi, I'm Lucinda Laughlin. Welcome to Auburn Community Television, Channel 20, and this episode of Meet the Artist. Today our guest is Nancy Polli. Nancy is an acrylic painter, and she is going to share with us her beautiful creative pieces. Nancy is also a member of the North Auburn Artists, which is a supporter of this television program, and she is participating in the Placer Arts Studio Tour coming up in mid-November. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you joined us too, because you have such beautiful work to share with us.
Thank you.
You know, I know that you have been being creative with art since you were a child, but at what point in time did you decide that you were truly an artist?
In 2012, I went to a artist retreat in Petaluma called Art Is You. And it was the first time I painted with acrylics. I had a big 30 by 30 painting. And by the time I was done that day, I looked at it and I thought, I don't just do art, I'm an artist. And it changed my life.
And that's kind of a hard moniker to accept, isn't it?
Yeah, you really have to own that your art is part of you rather than just a craft that you do.
Now, prior to doing the acrylic paintings that you do, what were you doing?
I did mostly watercolor, a little batik, a little this, a little that, whatever kind of took me, but mostly watercolor.
So what led you then into the acrylics?
It is such a versatile medium. I can get it thin enough so that I can see through it like a watercolor. I can have it thick like a oil painter, and you know, put it on with a pastel knife. So and I can keep painting over it as much as I want to without ruining what's underneath. So.
And what I love about your work is that you not only just use a brush and a tube of paint, that you do use a lot of other products. So maybe you can explain, but they're acrylic based or acrylic products. So could you explain some of those to us?
Well, one of the things, so for instance, this one right here has mica flakes in it. So what will happen is I can get a metallic effect or a sparkle. This one right here is a crackle paste, which actually you'll have a color on top and it will crack and you'll see what's underneath through the cracks, of kind of like a antique. And this one right here, this is fiber paste. So it can actually look like a cloth or some type of a rough fiber.
Oh,
so there are all sorts of different kinds of acrylic substances that you can use that are fun and add interest to a piece.
And then in addition, beyond the brushes, you use a lot of other different things to actually put this then onto the
and I
canvas.
brought some with me today. So this is from the dollar store. It's a bath thing and makes a great circle effect. So I'm always looking for shapes. Your garbage becomes my painting tool. And I call these actually mark makers. This is out of my garden. This was from a box of pastels. So you can get all sorts of textures and different kinds of shapes by using all sorts of things to apply the paint.
The fact that you use all of these things, then translating into this, you are very, very creative. And I hardly think that you're confined by some rigid idea when you're starting out to do your paintings.
Very often I have no idea. I pick some colors that call to me for whatever mood that I'm in, and I just begin to apply them to the canvas. I know that at any time, if I don't like them, I can paint over them, which is the beauty of acrylic. And so what happens is my paintings kind of emerge as something will strike me and I'll spend more time doing contrast or some kind of color to be able to bring it out. And so they kind of talk to me as I paint them.
Well, let's start out looking at some of your paintings, and we're going to start with the owls because I understand this is what you call your layering process.
Right. So this right here has probably about 5 different paintings on it until it became, first it became a tree, and then I saw an owl in the painting, and so I followed up and started bringing the owl out, and then I saw another owl, and then I started looking for owls. And so that became the wisdom tree. And my father was very into owls, and so this one reminds me of him.
Now, how did you, I guess, what of these things that you have shown us in tools, was there any special tools that you used in order to get some of these shapes that you have in here?
I know that I used stencils.
Okay.
I probably used, let me look here, probably used a tool like this also, which has all sorts of scrapey things that will leave different kinds of marks. Mm-hmm. And I probably also used some palette knives. I have all sorts of different kinds of palette knives that I use. And then I use water. So I spray water and it drips and merges with other colors. And so I know that some of those backgrounds were, had drips in them.
Now I had referenced this as your layering. So why would we call this a layering? What makes it that?
Just because I keep painting over it until whatever the painting is emerges. And you can see that the colors come out from, so some of the first layer is there, mm-hmm. and then some of the second layer is there, and then some of the third layer is there. And so all of those different layers play with each other in color.
Do you ever come to a point when you're just looking at something and you go, oh, this isn't working at all?
Oh no, that's never happened to me. Yes, I come to a point where, and I either take a break and walk away. Usually I take a break and I walk away, and I'll just let it sit for a while, and then I'll come back to it. Sometimes I will throw black or white on it and some gesso and see what happens. And I can always paint the whole canvas out if I want to.
Now, the next one we're going to talk about is one that did start as something completely different that turned into not only a completely different image, but you've actually changed it from being a horizontal to a vertical.
Right.
And that is the one that's just immediately behind me.
Right.
So why don't you explain what happened with this particular painting?
Okay. That started out in a landscape pose, and it started out as a landscape. So it was sunset, there were some mountains, a field in front, and it just was going no place. I was not excited about it, and so I turned it around. That's the first thing I did. And then I just began to add colors and textures, and I was really just playing. And then at some point, I kind of saw these figures in it, and so I then made the figures come out over what was at first a landscape painting.
So how did you make the figures come out? Because I know that you have the black that's in here.
Right.
So what is that process that you used?
So that is black gesso, and gesso is a ground. You can have white, you can have gold gesso. I use the black gesso because it really makes the color stand out mm-hmm. so well. It's also a little bit flatter, so it doesn't compete with the colors that are underneath, and it really covers the other paint well.
Now, also in this, you explained to me that you had some used ink.
Right. This one is, I use acrylic inks as one of my mediums in my acrylic painting, and before they became figures, I just was taking the tip of black acrylic ink and running it across the paper, the canvas, and then using a very light spray of water to make the ink disperse. And I also use acrylic inks to create some transparency over my paint, because most of it just adds something that I can't get with the acrylic paint.
Now, you also, the detail that you have in the faces here, is that done with the acrylic pen, or is it done in
Yes,
another
the
manner?
details were done with acrylic pen.
Which is something
today.
I never even knew existed.
Right. Paint pens are wonderful. So you can get them in all sorts of different colors. These are Liquitex. I also use the Molotov. So they let me have some little details of things. I also use a pen on those to bring out the details. And they're just great. You shake them up and you got acrylic paint.
So for your finer lines, then you're able to use those, come in
Right.
with those.
Right, instead of a brush. Yeah.
Now we're going to go to another painting that is my understanding that was a little more structured for you, and structured for you, for many, would still be very abstract, but we're going to talk about the one that is behind you.
This is a fall tree, Fall Among Us, and I like to challenge myself. So one, I don't use reds and fall colors very often, and two, I thought, well, let's try a little bit different style. So this is in the Montreal style, where he used a lot of boxes and kind of pulled things apart. And so I really had to think about how to use my color and where to put the lines in order for it to look like a tree when I was done.
So you actually had to not just let your freedom and your creativity go here. This one was actually saying, okay, I have to stay within some resemblance of a tree.
Right.
And I believe this, you said that this is called deconstruction. Is that what we think it may
the
be?
style is more deconstructed.
Okay.
So, really taking it apart, making a box of color, rather than just fusing the colors as we do so often in painting.
Now you have a second painting that is in this style that we didn't bring today.
Right.
So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about it.
That is the first one I tried. I had gone to Acadia National Park last year and took a picture of the beach trees, I think they were, next to a lake. And I came home and that was my first one, so it was yellows and blues and whites. And again, very lined, very kind of boxy, and it still, to me, looks like summer in Arcadia.
So that was your summer, and this is your fall. So are we going to be seeing a winter and a spring?
Fall and winter. Winter and spring got started. They're laying in the hallway right now, and they'll probably be painted over at some point. I just lost interest in it after two paintings.
Well, I love the fact that you have no problem with just starting over and doing something different.
No problem. I'm a good starter.
So now when you do that,
Yes.
let's say you wanted to start it over and you put this, what was it that you said you used here? Is this what you,
That's gesso.
and
Yes.
is that what you use to go
Yes,
over them?
and all canvases, or almost all canvases that you buy commercially, are already fixed with a white gesso. And so that keeps the color from sinking into your canvas or your paper, so that you have that beautiful pure pigment sits on the surface. So very often I use white gesso too, to even just paint out certain parts of a painting that I'm not thrilled with.
Which is what happened here. But also then, do you ever get where the texture of the prior painting comes through into the new painting?
Definitely. One of the paintings that I have that I did in neutrals, it actually started out with leaves that I had done in fluorescent pink, I believe. And those leaves, you can see them underneath the paint in a very subtle painting on top.
And that's what I find so fascinating about your work, because there are so many layers in it. And if you look at it more and more, you start seeing these things. And you're like, oh my gosh, look at this very subtle line you have here. And it's through this process, sometimes in the layering,
Right.
that you actually achieve those.
That's right. Yes.
Well, what you're doing now is really kind of interesting. It's what's called pour.
Right.
And, you know, I've been watching you on your Facebook page and all your different pours that you're doing. And we have some examples of your pours today, and I have one that I was particularly taken with, and that is this one.
Yes.
And I am particularly fascinated by this because you're pouring paint, but you were able to create this bird figure out of this pour. So explain to me first the process of doing the pours.
Pouring. With pouring, I take certain colors, I mix it. I actually brought some with me today. I use Floetrol, which I get at Home Depot. Liquitex has a wonderful pouring medium, but it's 4 or 5 times more expensive if I want to be an artist, or whether I just want to have my paint run. And then I add some silicone to the Floetrol and the acrylic mix. And what happens is it doesn't really mix. They flow on top of each other. And then I do a swiping technique, which brings out different some of the layers from underneath. And it is just so much fun to do. That's why I was doing it, because it was so much fun.
So when you're doing the pouring then, so it's basically you've poured this paint in a very liquid form on it. Do you manipulate it with anything, or do you just kind of like move it around? And
I do both. I move it around, and then I have a small squeegee, and I also have a credit card. And both of those, I will move paint in a certain direction in order to get to those layers and have the paint move in a certain direction.
Now, so when you're starting out with the pouring, you don't have any idea what that pour is going to give you.
I have no idea. That's part of the fun. And then, again, be able to look at it and say, what do I see in there? And so what I saw with all the oranges is I ended up seeing a phoenix, which is a firebird, and this is called Phoenix Rising. And I just kind of saw the spreading of the wings, and so my pour, which I didn't know what was going to happen with it, became a phoenix.
Now the oranges and the reds that we're seeing in here, was that part of the pour, or is it something that you came in later with?
These oranges right here were part of the pour, and then some of them I added to just bring out that feeling of fire afterwards.
And how about some of these where it comes out a little bit more? Did you do any extra manipulation or painting?
Some of those had started, and then I added paint to bring them out a little bit more.
Now this is also one where you use the acrylic pens to come in and do the very fine detail work here.
Right. So I use the pens to come in and do the face of the bird here, and some of these also as pen work with the feathers.
I think it's just remarkable the way you get, like you can see in this corner, is just how the various colors have just kind of on their own blended together and created these beautiful swirls through this.
Right, that's the fun of it.
We have some other examples of those, of your pours, your pouring method. You want to take that one and I'll hold this one. This one looks very much like an ocean to me.
Yes.
And that's what I find remarkable, is that something that is just a pour actually comes out with this image.
Well, it was, again, I manipulated.
Okay.
So I manipulated the paint so that it would have that kind of swirly feeling of it and bring out things from underneath.
Mm-hmm. And then this one here too, I love all the whites. Now, was that in the pour, or is that something that you came in with more detail later?
This is completely pour. I haven't altered this. Neither one of these have been altered at all since I poured them. Mm-hmm. So I poured different kinds of paint, and next to each other. Most of these are just paints that were next to each other. And then I manipulated the paint to create the motion in it.
Now you've also brought a pour that is just at the beginning of the stage of it, because it is the pour. And then and I love what you said to me about this. Do you remember?
This one, so I took a canvas board, and I actually just poured all my leftover paints on it and began to swipe, is what it's called, to create the motion in it. And I did kind of begin to see the galaxy. So just with my finger, I created the little orb that's here. But what I said to you is, oh no, that's not a painting, that's a pour. It's just not quite where I want it to be to call it a painting. But it's close. So I'll do a little bit more work, and I'll probably frame this one up for the fall studio tour.
I'm going to look forward to seeing that one in completion.
Thanks.
Now, moving off of the pours, you are doing another style that I am particularly fascinated, because this is like glorified finger painting, basically.
It is finger painting.
The one behind me was
Yes.
all done with your hands.
Right.
All right, so let's explain this particular process.
I was by myself one night, and I was feeling actually a little lonely, and I thought, well, go paint. Because that's what I do when I have feelings. So I got the big canvas out. I pulled some paints that called to me at that time, which, as you see, are not bright pinks and some of the bright colors I normally use. And I just poured them out on my palette, and then I started putting them on the canvas with my hands and moving them around and dipping my fingers in. And so, yeah, this one was with my hands.
Well, I have actually thought about going into painting, and I watched a woman who does everything with her hands, and I thought, well, you know what, I think I could get into that, because this notion of somehow using a brush, or although these other ways you do things are pretty fun too, but that's where I was starting thinking. Now, do you wear any type of gloves over your hands when you do it?
Oh, no. You can tell mostly by my hands that I don't wear gloves unless it's a castic substance. I don't wear gloves. I really like the feel. I like to be able to feel it. And when I'm working on the big canvases, it's almost like a little dance between me and the canvas and the paint. So it is a lot of fun.
Well, I think you've really captured, I think you do feel that emotion in this particular painting.
Yeah.
I certainly felt that. I felt like there was almost a sense of isolation in looking at it. So I think you achieved that. Your feelings did come through it.
Right.
And that's what one of the things I love about the vibrancy of your work, is because you can feel you in these paintings.
Right. And I think part of intuitive painting is that really the paintings come from me. And from whatever I happen to be feeling at the time, and how the paint and the shape speaks to me.
Now you also, you've worked with therapy painting before, haven't you? Is it?
Yeah, I've been a marriage and family therapist for 35 years, and so it was, I think art is a very powerful way for people to connect to themselves, sometimes to connect to feelings that they can't talk about. And so I use art therapy in my private practice also.
I think you would be perfect at that.
Yeah.
Now you are going to be on this Plaster Art Studio Tour.
Right.
And the Plaster Art Studio Tour is in mid-November, and unfortunately, I say unfortunately, it's on Veterans Day weekend, which does sometimes people go away. But we certainly hope people will stay around for the Plaster Art Studio Tours this year. We will be having a brochure that's going to be given out. Nancy, as well as all the other artists that are participating, will be distributing those brochures. We are given a particular, in the brochures, this is the front of it, and then there is a general map. And in the back of the book, you can look at the artist, and you can find them by alphabetical order, and then you can go within the book and it'll tell you the page they are on. Additionally, there is a map that you can go through, and you can actually find the artist. We have several regions this year, and they are represented by the different colors. And Nancy, you are in the Auburn region.
I am.
And for each one of the regions, we basically have another map that details the artists that are in the areas. And Nancy, can you find yourself on this map?
I'm number 22, so I'm very centrally located right off Luther Road.
So if you get your brochure and you want to come for the tour, certainly look us up. And if they want to find out more about your art, what's the best way they can get in contact with you?
You can find me on Facebook. Just look up Nancy Polli on Facebook. And you can contact me at my website, nancypolli.com, or you can find me on the North Auburn Artist Studio Tour site. Or Placer Arts site.
We also, as we're getting ready for the tour, all of the artists are participating in various events, and we certainly hope that you will be participating in those and coming. One of them is going to be the Art Walk, which is going to be an introductory to the Placer Arts Studio Tours. Placer Arts Studio Tours has been in existence to introduce various artists in the community, and is certainly an opportunity for you to meet not only Nancy, but the other artists who are participating. Thank you, Nancy, for coming and participating with us today. I loved you sharing your artwork with us.
Thank you so much, Lucinda.
I also want to thank you for tuning in to Auburn Community Television in this episode of Meet the Artist. You can watch us on Wave Channel 20 or on YouTube. We certainly hope that you'll watch us and share us, because we want people in our community to learn more about us. We are supported by the North Auburn Artist, which is introducing local artists to you. Who knows, maybe you have an artist living just around the corner. I certainly hope that you will tune in again, and maybe you'll meet one that is your neighbor. Thank you.